Hi everyone, my name is Corrina from Soundiron, and today I will be sharing with you a composition I made using the Hyperion Brass Micro. I find that brass is a pretty versatile library and you can find it in many different kinds of genres, but in today's example I decided to go for a brass ensemble feel, but to also give it a slight VHS kind of vibe. And so the melodic content is all made in Hyperion Brass, but I just filtered it a little bit using some plugins. So let's take a listen first, and then I'll share a little bit about each little piece. So I've broken down this project into all of the 4 different choices you can choose from in this library, from the trumpets to the tenor trombones to the horns, and then lastly the full ensemble, where you can kind of layer and mix and match different instruments as you pleased. For this project, I mainly used the ensemble for the tubas, as well as some more sustained chords for the trumpets. So in this demo, I would say there are about 3 main parts. The first part being sort of the intro, and it's sort of like a looped intro because it comes back at the very end. The first part with the trumpets being the main melody, and sort of a second part where the climax kind of happens. And so let's talk about the intro first. I've always really loved the concept and idea of the tuba because it just seems so epic, but also potentially so jolly at the same time. And so in this case, I decided to kind of channel a little bit more of the cute and jolly side of things. It's like if like a dwarf was like kind of like bouncing around, like walking with purpose or going somewhere. That's kind of the visual that I get, at least, or I guess Santa Claus or something like that. And I think it just sets the stage a little bit for a more cheerful, a more happy kind of first melody. But before we get to the melody, I just wanted to point out kind of in the intro, I start hinting at a constant rhythmic pattern, and that actually shows up right at the beginning, starting with the horns, and it kind of gets passed around throughout the demo. So you'll see it in the horns, and then I'll pass it to the tenors, and then eventually I'll also pass it to the trumpets, and then beyond even the intro, you'll see it peek out here and there. And so that is just to kind of set the stage and help build a little foundation for the melody to come in, which sounds like this. And so between the first phrase and the second phrase, the first phrase is kind of like beginning the sentence. And then the second phrase is almost like you start with the same sentence, but you actually finish the sentence and resolve it in some shape or form. You might have noticed that there's quite a few layers here, even though technically the melody is the same. In order to kind of give diversity to the phrasing of things, it's kind of like so some of them are long and some of them are short. And so in order to kind of work with that, I would mix and match the 30-second staccato with the sustains, with the 8th note staccatos as well, and kind of like finesse it a little bit to kind of give the best of all worlds that I would like to hear. So for the most part, this first section is kind of where the trumpets have their little spotlight. But does not mean that the horns and the tenors are not there. Some of them are doing these rhythmic motifs. And then at one point, to kind of glue together the first phrase and the second phrase of the melody in the trumpets, kind of injecting a little bit of like a slightly more angrier tone. But at the same time, because it's in the context of something so happy, it actually just sounds a little bit silly. And that's kind of the vibe that I want. Something that's just kind of like, I'm angry, but it's not actually like, oh, I'm angry. You know, it's just kind of like a cute angry of sorts. So put together, this is what that sounds like. So it just kind of fills that empty space a little bit so that we can contain the tension of the phrase to the next line. After all of this happens, we go into the second part, kind of where things start to develop. What I mean by develop is kind of like the melody line starts moving somewhere. In the first part, I would say it's more like I said something and then I went back and said the same thing again, but with a little bit more. But this time, we're going to go for a much longer phrase. It's going to be like a continual build up until the highest point, and then we come back down to the beginning. With that, I decided to pass the main melody down to the lower instruments, tenor trombones, as well as the horns. This is what that sounds like. And you'll also notice that the line itself is a little bit more sustained. It's a little bit more smooth. There aren't as many of those like ba-ba-da-bas. And that's because I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of contrast, kind of to express that, oh, we're entering a different space right now. But at the same time, I still wanted to maintain that peppiness. And so I let the trumpets still do that in the next part. So now it became the decoration to the melody instead of the main melody itself. And then this is kind of like a call and response situation where low brass says something, and then afterwards the trumpets respond. So after low brass and trumpet have their little conversation, who gets the final say? The trumpets get the final say because, trumpets. And so this last part is kind of like the climactic moment where the melodic line goes higher than it's ever been and reaches a chord that feels really tense and is very dissonant, but in a very good way that makes you want to resolve it. It kind of follows a similar principle to the first part where now the horns are doing the ba-da-da-ba-ba. I also added some ensemble chords that sound like this. Just to add a little bit more thickness to the whole thing. And then in addition to the melody, there were some auxiliary secondary harmonic lines in the horns. And the function of a lot of these harmonic lines is to blossom the melody to a certain point. And so they are all acting as support roles of, there's a lot going on, and we're also growing in volume, but also in harmony and rhythm and all of that, so that when we reach that top point, it feels like we've arrived somewhere. It's kind of like, we get somewhere, and then boom, and then we come back to just kind of right back at the beginning. If this were to be in a video game, for example, that would be like a perfect place for the game to loop the audio back to the beginning, and so it can continue playing for pretty much as long as it needs to. That's pretty much it for this composition. It was a good challenge to find a way to make things feel interesting while using instruments with really similar tonal qualities. This time it was less of a choosing certain timbres or tones, but it was more of a what rhythmic choices would you want to make, or which harmonies do you want to choose, or how would you want to go about designing the structure of the piece itself. So I hope this was really helpful and that it would kind of give you some more tools in your toolkit to design and create beautiful melodies and harmonies in your own pieces. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.